Hello everyone and welcome back to the Biology and Health Bloom Institute summer course for middle school. Today is our 5th class and we will be learning about photosynthesis, which is how plants make their own food and power themselves. This is a very important topic because we have a symbiotic relation with plants because they give us oxygen and we give them carbon dioxide. So for us humans especially, it's very important to know how this relationship works in nature. So let's get started. So here's a short recap and you can take notes from this and use them if you need them. So what is the function of cellular respiration? Do you remember from the last class, class 4? The function of cellular respiration is to basically break down glucose and turn it into ATP for the body to use and get energy. Then what is too powerful for the body to handle without breaking it up? Yes, the answer is glucose, because the cells cannot just take one big chunk of glucose and use it to power our body. We need to take the glucose and break it up into 36 ATP molecules. Which step of cellular respiration makes the most amount of ATP? If you remember, it's ETC, the electron transport chain, because all of the high energy electrons go into this process and power 32 out of 36 ATP molecules. And because of that energy, we are able to produce all of those ATP molecules. Then how many molecules of ATP is one molecule of glucose equal to? Yes, it is equal to 36 molecules. And which process of ATP is aerobic and which is anaerobic? So if you remember correctly from the last class, aerobic means that it requires oxygen and anaerobic means that it does not, not requiring oxygen. So yes, the last one, ETC, has a step where it takes in oxygen to take away the electrons and ions so the rest of the chain can move. So yes, ETC is the only aerobic function of the ATP or cellular respiration process. Okay, let's get started. So take a deep breath and now thank a plant. What do you already know about photosynthesis? Please discuss if you have someone else watching this, or you could just write down on your paper. And by the way, on this slide, this meant ATP creation and not just ATP, this meant which process of cellular respiration is aerobic. So yeah. So what do you already know about photosynthesis? I hope you're done with that discussion now, and let's get started. So photosynthesis is when plants use sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water in order to grow. As a result, they produce glucose, which is sugar, and oxygen, which can be used later in cellular respiration, and also oxygen will be given to the humans in the environment. Plants make their own food out of photosynthesis. They do not consume any or other organisms to produce their own food for the most part of plants, but all plants have photosynthesis and they are called autotrophs. Organisms automatically making their own food, and organisms that can use photosynthesis to create sugar from carbon dioxide, sunlight, and water. So I know this sounds very complex, but trust me, it's easy to understand, just like all the previous material in our classes, right? So are you guys familiar with this process? Sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water go into the plant, and out come the oxygen produced, plant growth, and glucose. Okay, so I'm sure you guys know this, right? And you've seen it while gardening. That's why we put water in plants, and that's why plants live outside, and that's why we breathe out carbon dioxide and plants take it in, right? So this leads to all of those things. And then the glucose the plant makes will also be used for cellular respiration, because plants do both cellular respiration and photosynthesis. So before we start, this is how to count molecular content. So you see this 5 before the C over here? That means 5 carbon atoms. So if there's any letter and there's a number before that, that's indicating the amount of atoms. And C is equal to carbon, right? And then see this subscript, the tiny number below an atom. This is oxygen, but that's a 2, which is a subscript. So if there's a subscript below an atom, then multiply that number by the first number in the molecule. So this is 5, and then times 2 is 10. So we have 10 oxygen atoms. So in 5 CO2, we have 5 carbon atoms and 10 oxygen atoms. Let's get started with the rest. And please remember this. I would like you to put this down in your notebook as well. And you can put the previous slides in your notebook as well. If you know what photosynthesis is, then yeah. So here's the photosynthesis equation. And what do you notice about this equation? I'll give you a minute to think. Okay, this equation is the opposite of the respiration equation. See, the products and reactants are switched actually. Like, can you see at the start it's CO2 and H2O, and in respiration at the end it's CO2 and H2O, and same with the glucose and oxygen. This is because there's a symbiotic relationship between photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So inside a plant, during photosynthesis, the chloroplast creates glucose and oxygen for the mitochondria to break down into water and carbon dioxide, as well as ATP as a remainder in respiration. And this process goes on, and these two cells complement each other and make a whole system. By the way, respiration happens in all organisms, but photosynthesis only happens in plants because only plants have a chloroplast. We humans don't have chloroplasts, and we can't absorb light energy from like any of the green pigments that the plant has. So that's not us. It's only plants, right? And then, so at the start of the equation, there were 18 oxygen atoms, 12 hydrogen atoms, and 6 carbon atoms. And at the end, there were the same amount. See, in these two equations. So these two equations represent what's going on here in photosynthesis and cellular respiration, the cycle of the transferring of materials, right? Water, CO2, oxygen, and glucose are constantly being transferred to each other cell because one cell uses that as the product and the other cell uses it as a reactant. It's kind of like one man's trash is another man's treasure, right? So like what one cell makes as waste, the other cell will use to do its processes. So there's a mitochondria and the chloroplast. That's how it works in a plant cell. I mean, in a plant, yeah. And then at the start of the equation, there were 18 oxygen, 12 hydrogen, and 6 carbon, as I said. And at the end, they were the same amount. So sunlight does not have any atoms. It's a simple light energy. It's not like a material. That's a constant factor required for the plant to absorb in order for photosynthesis to occur. What we have just seen is a chemical reaction taking place inside of the plant. Molecules just rearrange themselves to create products. This phenomenon is called the conservation of mass. Mass is being conserved. So the law is that nothing in the world will be taken away from the world or either created. Mass is just recycled, and new products are being created out of the same reactants. So let's say I had to make a phone, right? I'm not gonna magically make a phone out of my hands like Harry Potter or something. I'm actually gonna like go and get like cobalt or the materials, right? Then I have to like grind it up and create a base layer for the phone. Then I have to get the silicone chip, right? And then I have to make the phone out of already present materials. So similarly, this is the conservation of mass. So no matter can be created or destroyed. It's just recycled in the earth. Like think of anything. We can't create something and we can't destroy it. We are just like recycling old things to create new ones. So that is the conservation of mass, right? So let's review a vocabulary, and this is for the chloroplast, which is exclusive to plants. It's the cell that's responsible for photosynthesis, and it creates the products of oxygen and glucose. And notice how glucose is taken as for the plant, and oxygen is also taken for the plant to do in cellular respiration. And also a large portion of that oxygen goes to us, which we can inhale. So to say thank you to the plants for giving us some oxygen, right? And then so here are the reactants that are going into the plant. So chloroplasts contain chlorophyll, say chlorophyll. So it's a light green pigment, and because of its light green color, it is extremely good at absorbing the red and blue colors from sunlight. So actually the like UV rays of sunlight have the red and blue like wavelengths or the waves of red and blue color, like the ultraviolet light, and the light green color from the pigments of chlorophyll is the most optimal color to absorb sunlight. So like if you got a red cloth and made it try to absorb sunlight, it would not really absorb it really well, and it would probably reflect some as well. But the light green color is really good at absorbing the colors from sunlight. And thus, because it's like the opposite of these colors, it can do a lot of stuff and absorb a lot of sunlight for the plant. So remember that the light green color is best at taking sunlight. And then carbon dioxide, so plants contain stomata, which are tiny little holes for plant leaves to take in carbon dioxide. And then H2O, or water, is transported from the root of the plant to the chloroplast to commence photosynthesis. So that's why plants have roots, and the roots go searching far and wide for water. If you've seen plants in your garden, the roots, or even the trees, the roots really go deep underground searching for water. Especially in like deserts, you'll see plants that have adapted with really long roots to get water. So yeah, so this is transported from the root of the plant to the chloroplast to commence photosynthesis. Yes. And then look at this image for a while. So this is like the reactions inside a chloroplast, which is the cell that is responsible for photosynthesis. Okay, so the reactions on the left side are called the light dependent reactions, meaning that they depend on the light in order to function. And then the Calvin cycle, or the cycle that turns carbon dioxide into sugar, does not need direct sunlight to function. It just needs that energy, the ATP and the electrons from the light reaction to power itself. So as you can see, our familiar friends ATP and NADPH, the electron carriers, are being used here to power the Calvin cycle. But what makes the ATP and NADPH? That's because of the light, and also the H2O, the water, through the light reactions turns to oxygen through a chemical reaction. And in the Calvin cycle, carbon dioxide is chemically converted to sugar. And you can see here that the hydrogen at the end of NADPH, there's these hydrogen ions, right? It's represented here, but then it's using those electrons and hydrogen ions, and it goes to the Calvin cycle and it loses those hydrogen ions because they're really powerful and they powered that Calvin cycle. And then over here, we can see that ADP plus P is here, like adenine diphosphate, right? Because it used a lot of the ATP energy over here. And like after it uses that energy, then it will go back here and it will gain more phosphate molecules to be turned into ATP again. So that's how it works, right? And over here, it's adding some phosphate molecules. And as we learned, the phosphate groups, when they're released, when the phosphate group is released, it powers and energizes the rest of the body or the cells that needs power. So now in more details, like other than my explanation, so the light dependent reactions, the photo part, so the chlorophyll and the thiacolides absorb light energy. The energy splits water molecules apart. Chloroplasts release oxygen gas molecules as a waste product. Hydrogen and high energy electrons go to fuel the next stage of photosynthesis. Then the synthesis Calvin cycle, so stomata, tiny holes in plant leaves, allow carbon dioxide to diffuse into the stroma of the chloroplast. Hydrogen is fused together with carbon dioxide to form glucose, and yes, that's how glucose is made. And then energy from the electrons is converted into chemical energy stored in the bonds between atoms of the larger glucose molecule. So some of these words you might not know. So thiacoloids are sacs that contain the light green pigment chlorophyll, and then NADPH are electron carrier molecules, and we learned about that during cellular respiration as well. And then stroma is like a jelly fluid inside the chloroplast, okay? So I want you guys to write down some of these parts, such as the chlorophyll absorbs light energy, and then please write down that the Calvin cycle does not require light directly. Say that hydrogen and high energy electrons go on to fuel the Calvin cycle. And then also write something about the stomata absorbing carbon dioxide, because these plant holes are the reason why plants can get carbon dioxide. So never cover a plant's leaves because then it won't be able to breathe. So yeah, these are some really important stuff you'll need to know in science. So any questions or what goes inside a chloroplast? So if you have any questions about these, you can go back in the slideshow and see me talking about this stuff. And it's really important. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this class and I hope you learned a lot, and especially about what goes inside a chloroplast, because a lot of people know about photosynthesis, but not that many people know about the actual processes, the chemical processes going on inside a plant to commence the conversion of sunlight to energy. So anyways, thanks a lot and I'll see you next time.